They called me a failure the night my mother was dying, said I was chasing ghosts. Said I couldn't even keep a desk job, as if I hadn't spent the better part of a decade dragging wounded soldiers out of gunfire halfway across the world. They didn't know where I'd been, what I'd done, or who I'd become. And the truth is, they never asked. But that sure didn't stop them from laughing over the ham and mashed potatoes like I was just the family punchline again. "You look tired," my sister sneered, raising her glass. "What do you even do now, anyway?" My father didn't lift his eyes from the plate. "She probably works security at a warehouse or something." My hands trembled under the table, not from shame, but from restraint. They had no idea. They never wanted to know. And then it happened. A sharp voice cracked over the airport intercom, loud and clear, slicing through the air like a command. "Clear the way for Army General." Repeat, "Clear the way for Army General." Silence fell across the terminal like a thunderclap. I stood, every uniformed officer nearby stopped in place. They turned, stiffened, and saluted. My niece dropped her fork. My brother-in-law whispered, "Wait." "What?" My boots echoed across the marble as I walked forward, steady. The ribbons on my uniform caught the light. My name tag, Dawson, gleamed under the spotlights. They had called me a failure. But the world already knew who I was. Now my family had no choice but to see it too. My name is Evelyn Dawson, and for years, I let them call me a disappointment. Because it was easier than explaining what I really was, but not anymore. Before I tell you everything, I just want to know you're here with me. If you're listening, drop a here in the comments. I'd love to know how far this story reaches, and if you believe stories like mine matter, go ahead and hit subscribe. Because sometimes, the quietest voice can be the loudest kind of justice. Thank you. Now here's my story. The summer heat in Greenville, South Carolina, felt heavier than I remembered. It stuck to my skin like regret as I pulled my old Jeep up the gravel driveway of my parents' house. The American flag still flapped on the porch, just like it had my entire childhood, rigid, proud, unwavering. That flag had watched my father, Colonel Henry Dawson, salute every morning for 40 years, and now it watched me return after 8 years of silence. The house hadn't changed, white shutters, red brick, the same porch swing that creaked every time it moved. But I had. The last time I stood here, I was shouting across the dinner table. My eyes were red, my voice shaking, and my father's face was twisted in fury. "You're destroying this family's legacy," he roared. I walked out of that house with a duffel bag and a decision I could never undo. No one knew I didn't leave the military. I just left the version they liked to put on brochures. I parked beside Mason's sleek, government-issued sedan and killed the engine. My hand stayed on the steering wheel a second too long. The backyard buzzed with voices and laughter. Mason stood in the middle of it, tall and polished in his Air Force blues. He looked like a recruitment poster. On his arm was Rachel, his fiancée, a military lawyer with a smile so sharp it felt surgical. It didn't reach her eyes, but it didn't need to. I stepped into view. The volume dipped just for a moment. Subtle. But I felt it. Mom looked up from the grill. Her apron was spotless. Her hair perfect, like always. "Evelyn. You didn't say you were coming." Her voice was flat, like the stack of paper plates beside her. Dad didn't even turn his head. His eyes skimmed over my jeans, the scuffed boots, the lack of uniform. "You're late," he muttered. Then turned right back to Mason, who was deep into a story about his deployment in Qatar. I lingered by the dessert table, holding a can of warm soda I didn't want. No one asked where I'd been. Not one of them. Then Rachel's voice rang out behind me, bright and cutting. "Evelyn left West Point to find herself, isn't that right? Something with an NGO. What was it again?" The laugh that followed wasn't cruel. It was worse. It was dismissive. That night, I slept in the basement on a folding cot surrounded by Mason's old trophies. My childhood bedroom had been converted into Rachel's wedding command center. Lace samples, RSVP envelopes, sticky notes on the wall. I didn't belong anywhere in that house anymore. I pulled a small wooden box out from beneath the cot. Inside, a photo, me in cadet gray, smiling beside my father at West Point. I was 19. I believed in honor. I believed there was still a version of it that had room for people like me, but I wasn't that girl anymore, not after Helmand. Not after the blood. Not after the missions that don't show up on paper. I held the photo under the basement light and closed my eyes. I could still hear the blasts. Still see the faces. I had come back to this house. But nothing inside it recognized me. And I wasn't sure I recognized myself either. The invitation to Mason's promotion ceremony came by text the night before. If you want to come, it's at Fort Belvoir. No pressure. It read like pity with punctuation. I debated skipping it. But old instincts die hard. I showed up in a plain black coat. Quiet. Invisible. The way they seemed to like me best. The auditorium buzzed. Polished shoes clicked against tile. Applause rolled like low thunder. Mason looked every bit the golden boy. My parents beamed like the lights themselves. I took a seat in the back. That was the goal. Fade into the wall. Be the shadow they'd always said I was. Then a voice rang out. Major General Dawson, I didn't expect to see you here. I turned. The world paused. It was General Mark Ryder, full dress regalia. Taller than I remembered. Eyes still sharp, he extended a hand. No, a salute, a perfect, precise salute. The kind you give someone who's earned it in blood. I returned it, out of instinct. Heads turned. Whispers followed. Rachel's hand trembled. She dropped her coffee. The mug shattered on the floor. My mother went pale. My father blinked like he'd seen a ghost, and Mason stared like he'd never seen me before in his life. Ryder stepped closer. Didn't think I'd run into Whisperhawk outside Helmand. A young lieutenant nearby gasped. She's Whisperhawk? That was real? Another murmured, I thought that was just classified myth. I didn't say a word. Just nodded once at Ryder. Shook his hand. Walked out, quiet. Sharp. Done. That night, I sat alone at a bar off base. The bourbon was cheap, the silence earned. My phone buzzed. A message from Ryder, you can't hide forever, Dawson. They need to know who you are. You owe it to the team. I stared at that message. He was right. I'd let myself become a ghost because it was easier than explaining the past, but ghosts don't get saluted, soldiers do. The motel sat just off I-95, its neon sign flickering like a heartbeat on its last legs. I'd checked in under a fake name 2 nights ago. Old habit. Hard to break. The room smelled faintly of bleach and old smoke. I sat cross-legged on the polyester bedspread, laptop humming in front of me. The hum of the air conditioner barely muffled the stillness pressing in on all sides. I logged in, an old backdoor entry point to a private intel network I still had partial clearance for. Muscle memory kicked in. My fingers moved faster than thought. What I found hit me like a sucker punch, a breach, not just any breach, a trail that veered into a classified operations folder tagged Nightshade. That's what Night Wolf had been renamed in its last phase. The encryption held until I followed the last ping, and there it was. The recipient, Rachel Morgan, yes, Rachel. My brother's fiancée. The same one who'd laughed at me over hamburgers 2 nights ago. The sender, Derek Tate. The name pulled me straight back into memory. A former analyst assigned briefly to Night Wolf, before his clearance was stripped and he vanished into the wind, and now he was sending Rachel files under the subject line, Women in Combat, Policy Draft. I opened the attachment, mission logs. Satellite footage. Audio transcripts. The entire 2014 campaign in Helmand Province. Everything we'd been told was burned, sealed, redacted for good. My name? On every single page. I slammed the laptop shut and grabbed my keys. I drove straight to Mason and Rachel's condo in Arlington. My heart thudded against my ribs like a second heartbeat. Rachel opened the door still in uniform, face pale, eyes rimmed in red. Evelyn. Her voice barely made it past her lips. I didn't know. I swear, you didn't know you were reading a classified kill-op? I thought it was research for a policy brief. Derek said it was cleared, it looked legal. It came through a procurement channel, I thought. My voice dropped lower than steel. You didn't just read a file. You compromised lives. Tears welled in her eyes. They suspended me yesterday. I didn't mean to. Please believe that. I wanted to scream. Instead, I stepped back, meaning doesn't erase damage. What Rachel didn't know, what she couldn't know, was how deep this went. A Senate subcommittee was knee-deep in debate about women in combat. And Senator Eileen Harrow, a known hardliner, was spearheading efforts to roll it all back. She believed women had no place past the perimeter wire. Now, she had ammunition. And my name was stamped all over it. The whispers had already begun. Blogs, political think tanks, forums quoting a legendary ghost turned myth. We were being turned into political theater before the curtain even rose. That night, alone in the motel, my laptop pinged again, an encrypted message. The sender, R. Lee. Subject line, it's happening. If they expose us, they'll go after the villages. The people we protected. Civilians, I've gone dark. You should too. Rachel Viper Lee. The only person who ever dragged me out of a fire zone with a dislocated shoulder and half her ribs cracked. If she was sounding the alarm, it was serious. I stared at the screen long after the message disappeared. This wasn't about shame anymore. Or my father's silence. This was about the lives we'd fought for. The ones we lost. The ones who still didn't know they were being dragged into the spotlight. The war hadn't ended. It had just changed fronts, and I knew how to fight in the dark. The envelope came at dawn, no return address. Just a courier who said my name like it was an order. Inside, a letter. Temporary reinstatement, signed by the Secretary of Defense. My assignment, lead a joint cyber intelligence and tactical unit on a new operation, Iron Veil. Target, a terrorist syndicate based near Mogadishu. They weren't just running guns or laundering cash. They had a cyber warfare wing. Intelligence showed links to Nightwolf data leaks and a plan, an actual, multi-vector plan, to cripple U.S. diplomatic infrastructure in Nairobi. The real kicker, their code used a digital comm scrambler I personally built during my last deployment in Helmand. A signature so specific, only 2 people could have replicated it, me and Derek Tate. I arrived at Fort Belvoir later that day, no fanfare. Jeans, black t-shirt, boots still dusted from motel carpet. Inside the ops center, the air was electric. Screens lined the walls. Analysts in fatigues, old war dogs and civvies, the new generation staring at me like I didn't belong. A woman at the center table didn't even flinch when I walked in, Captain Jess Parker. Lead cyber, she said without standing. No offense, ma'am, but your file's pretty blank. Classified, someone muttered, another whispered, they're trusting a ghost with live assets? I stepped forward, tapped into the control panel, and brought up Iron Veil's digital blueprint. Drop points. Chokeholds. Comm nodes. Live routes. Then I showed them the satellite pass that intercepted the Nairobi spike. That's a Nightwolf signal. I said. I wrote it. Which means I know how to shut it down. No one said a word for 10 seconds. Jess folded her arms, nodded once. All right then. What's the plan? Split approach, I said. You breach the network in real time. No lag, my team moves on Hassan's location, a storage compound outside the Mogadishu port. You cut the comms, we breach. We extract intel, dismantle the system. Head started nodding. The room shifted, but something kept tapping at the back of my brain. Someone was leaking our moves. A secondary transmission had been detected. A loop buried deep in encrypted chatter. Someone inside was feeding Hassan our playbook. I spent that night tearing through internal logs. Cross-checking names, clearances, timestamps, and there it was again, Derek Tate. He'd held copies of Nightwolf movements. After his dismissal, he kept access through ghost contracts tied to a shell firm with direct political donors, one of them connected to Senator Harrow's campaign staff. I needed confirmation, so I called the only person who knew Tate before he vanished, Rachel. We met at a small coffee shop just off base. Smelled like scorched espresso and guilt. Do you know he's selling our data? I asked. Rachel shook her head. I knew he went dark, but I didn't know it was this. I swear, Evelyn. Don't swear, I said. Just help me find him. She hesitated. Then nodded. Give me access. I still have a few backdoors into procurement logs. I handed her a burner phone. 3 days, I said. That's all you get. I'm done playing defense. She looked up at me, eyes no longer judgmental, but resolute. I used to think I knew who you were, she said. I didn't. But I want to know. I promise. As I walked away, I could feel it, like the wind shifting before a storm. This wasn't about vindication anymore. This was about cutting the cancer out at the root. We landed in Mogadishu under a moonless sky. The kind of black that feels heavy. The kind that presses against your skin like damp cloth. The convoy rolled slow along back roads, potholes, shadows. Silence. Past buildings that looked like they'd given up trying to stand straight. Bullet holes in every wall. Kids in the distance chased stray dogs or watched us from rooftops, wide-eyed and still. I sat behind the driver, counting every breath. Every mile. My shoulder ached with every bump in the road, old damage from Helmand, scar tissue deep enough to feel when something was wrong. And something was definitely wrong. Our objective was simple, on paper, anyway. Jess Parker would breach their comms from the base of operations. My team would hit a warehouse on the eastern edge of the port, a suspected storage site for Hassan's cyber ops, 2 fronts. 1 hit, get in. Get intel. Get out. I never trusted missions that sounded that clean. We reached the breach point 10 minutes ahead of schedule. Boots hit gravel. Guns checked. Eyes sharp, Jess's voice crackled into my ear. Calm. Precise, I'm in. Systems are shallow. This won't take long. I gave the signal. The team advanced. The perimeter was too quiet, no guards. No cameras. No movement. Jess's voice came back, this time tense. Evelyn. This isn't right. There's nothing here. No active nodes. This whole system's a decoy. Before I could respond, the first blast hit. A drone screamed overhead, slicing the night with machine-precise fire. The alley behind us exploded. Concrete shattered. We were in a kill box. Back. Back. I shouted. Disperse pattern, smoke and decoy, now. We threw jammers and smoke grenades, flooding the area with thermal noise and false heat signatures. Confusion was our best shot at survival. I grabbed Alex, our comm tech, by the vest and pulled him into a side alley. Blood was pouring from his leg just above the knee, but he was conscious, alert. That was enough. Jess's voice came through again, louder, urgent. They knew our route. They knew our timing. Evelyn, someone gave them our blueprint. No kidding, we moved fast. Through crumbling doorways, broken streets, collapsed walls, the warehouse finally came into view. It looked like a ghost of what it once was, steel frame warped by time. Security lights flickering. Inside, Hassan was there. Hunched over a hard case. Fingers flying across a control pad, a black box sat in front of him. Red diode blinking, not a server, a bomb, and not just any bomb. A satellite-linked payload built on a custom encryption line, mine. A version of code I developed during the final weeks of Night Wolf. Never documented. Never shared, only 2 people ever had it. I dropped to my knees beside the device, breath caught in my throat. 12 seconds left, breathe, I muttered. Focus. I isolated the uplink. Pulled the kill switch wiring. My shoulder screamed. Blood ran down the back of my collar. 10 seconds. 5. 2. I snipped the final circuit. Silence. Package disabled, I said. Jess came back on comms. We've traced the satellite relay. Evelyn, you won't believe who funded it. Shell company linked to Harrow's committee. Same donor names. Same consultant trail. I looked at Hassan, unconscious now, zip-tied, blood smeared across his collar. This hadn't been a botched raid, it was a setup. They wanted us dead and buried. They wanted Nightwolf erased. We moved out in silence. Alex between us, limping but alive. Dust clung to our skin. My ribs felt cracked, but I kept walking. Jess watched me at the evac point. This time, her eyes were different, not skeptical, just aware. "You got us out," she said. Alex, barely upright, murmured, "I know who you are now." I nodded, but deep inside, something had shifted. I was done being a ghost. Mogadishu burned that part of me away. I wasn't the shadow anymore. I was the one leading them out of it. Rachel didn't disappear. While I recovered at Walter Reed, she started digging. The name she carried still held enough pull to open a few locked doors. What she found, a trail. Cold, bureaucratic, but unmistakable. Encrypted messages between Derek Tate and a dummy account, Falcon Red, financial records. Ghost payments routed through third-party contractors. Consulting reports disguised as combat performance studies. It was a network. Intentional. Sustained. They weren't just careless, they'd kept the data. Hidden it. Leveraged it. Used it as currency in backroom deals and campaign strategies. She called me one night. Voice tight, "I found it. And I'm going to testify." I didn't thank her. Not because I wasn't grateful, but because words weren't big enough to hold what that decision meant. She was putting everything on the line, her career. Her marriage. Her safety, for me. For the team. For the truth. The Pentagon hearing was set within the week, not a courtroom. But it may as well have been. Gray walls. Gray carpet. Gray faces, no reporters. But everyone already knew, Night Wolf had become a political storm. Some called us traitors, others, ghosts. Few called us what we were, soldiers. The night before the hearing, I went home, not to a motel, home. Mom answered the door with red eyes and trembling hands. "We thought you abandoned us," she said. "When you left West Point, I thought you left us too." Dad was in his chair by the fireplace, his medals catching the low light. His voice, when it came, was quieter than I remembered. "I should have asked what you were going through, instead of assuming what you weren't." He opened a drawer. Pulled out an old photo, me and Mason in the backyard. I had my arms stretched out like a tent over his head, blocking the sun. "You've always protected people," he said. "Even before you were a soldier." He handed me the photo. "No matter what they say tomorrow. I know who you are. You're my daughter." It was the first time he'd said that in 8 years. I walked into the hearing the next morning, no fear, no doubt, not a ghost. Not a question mark, just myself. Major General Evelyn Dawson, Senator Eileen Harrow sat across the long oak table, her expression so still it could have been carved. Clinical. Controlled. Predatory. "Major General Dawson," she began, voice calm but sharp. "You've operated in the shadows of unsanctioned missions. You've violated protocol. What evidence do you have that these missions were even legal?" I opened my folder and slid a set of documents forward, original Nightwolf logs. Full, unredacted. Every move we made, every call we answered. No edits. No filters. Included was one key moment, our mission in Koba. When I stopped a drone strike with seconds to spare, I played the footage. Abort. Abort. Civilian presence confirmed. Hold your fire, I repeat, hold your fire. My voice cracked in the clip. I didn't hide that. No music. No speeches. Just raw reality. What it looked like when someone chose restraint over firepower. Then Rachel Morgan stepped forward. She presented everything, emails between Tate and Falcon Red. Payment transfers from shell companies. Donation ledgers tying those funds to Harrow's private policy network. And then she played it, a recording, Harrow's voice. Cold and unmistakable. "If you continue to back Evelyn Dawson, neither you nor your fiancé will work in this town again. Be smart. Stay silent." The room dropped into a vacuum of silence. Even the legal aide stopped writing. The Secretary of Defense leaned forward. "General Dawson. You acted with honor, clarity, and courage. This committee hereby restores your full rank, clears your record, and formally recognizes Operation Nightwolf as critical to national security." I didn't cry, I didn't smile, I just stood still, like stone, finally not waiting to be seen. That night, I sat in a quiet hotel room just 2 blocks from the Pentagon. The beige wallpaper hadn't changed. But everything inside me had. My phone buzzed, an old secure line. I hadn't touched it in years. One message, from R. Lee, subject, for the one who stayed awake, no body text, just an attachment. I opened it. It was a scanned letter, handwritten in Rachel's sharp, deliberate scrawl. You kept your promise. We've all been watching, some from shadows, some from new lives, but we never stopped believing you'd do what we couldn't. You stood up. You made us visible again. We were Night Wolf, we never slept, we still don't. At the bottom of the letter was a photo, a silver bracelet. Dull from wear. Still intact, etched on the underside, lupus non-dormant, the wolf does not sleep. I reached into my own bag, pulled out the identical bracelet I hadn't worn since Helmand. The clasp still worked. I called her, the line rang once. Then I heard her voice. I heard, she said, I didn't know anyone was still listening. We always were, she replied. Just waiting for you to roar again. I didn't speak. I couldn't. My throat closed. You reminded them we existed, she said. You made sure the story didn't die in silence. We hung up without goodbye. There was nothing left to say. Veterans Day came with the first frost. Greenville was blanketed in folded chairs, old flags, and early morning quiet. I didn't wear my uniform. But I didn't hide either. The stage banner read, honoring Major General Evelyn Dawson, Night Wolf, and Operation Iron Veil. I never thought I'd see my name in print without a shadow hanging over it. The MC stepped forward, our first speaker, someone who's learned the cost of judgment and the power of truth. Please welcome Rachel Morgan. She stood in a plain black suit. Nothing fancy. She looked out over the crowd, then right at me. My sister-in-law taught me something I never expected to learn, she began, that courage doesn't always wear a uniform. Sometimes it wears silence. Sometimes it walks back into the fire after everyone else has left. No apology. Just recognition. My father came next. He walked slowly, hands trembling slightly, a medal in his palm. He didn't give a speech, he just pinned it to my chest. I was wrong, he whispered. You did what I never dared to dream of. He stepped back. His jaw tight. His eyes full, then Mason stepped up. Still in his formal blues, he gave me a sharp salute, then leaned in, just loud enough for me to hear, you were always the better soldier, and the braver sibling, always. My mother's hug came next. Tight. Real. No words, I hadn't felt that kind of embrace in years, I hadn't planned to speak. But when the MC looked my way, I rose and walked to the mic. The wind caught the edges of my coat. The light hit my face. I took a breath and began. I used to think being forgotten was a punishment, but I've learned, it's not the world that defines you, it's what you remember about yourself. If you've ever been told your story didn't matter, or that your silence meant failure, don't believe them. Your story has weight, it has teeth, it can outlive fear. I looked out at the crowd. I was erased once, but not anymore. The applause didn't come right away, then it did, big. Loud. Real. Behind me, I heard Rachel crying softly. After the ceremony, as the crowd filtered out, a young veteran approached. Barely 20. Eyes sharp but shy, he held a folded American flag with both hands. My dad served in Helmand, he said. He told me about you. About what you did. He said he came home because of you. I took the flag. Nodded. My throat tight. Thank you, I said. That means more than you know. He shook his head. No, ma'am, thank you. Then he turned and walked away. Later that day, I visited the memorial wall. Rows of names etched in black granite. Near the bottom, I saw it, a new inscription, Major General Evelyn Dawson, Night Wolf, Mission Without End. I traced the words with my fingertips. The stone was cold, but I wasn't. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't drifting. I was home, not just with my family, with myself. After the clapping faded and the chairs were folded away in the town square, I should have felt at peace. My name had been cleared, my rank reinstated, my Family, healed in ways I never thought possible, but peace didn't feel like a medal or a headline. It felt like a quiet breath that never quite filled your lungs, and something still pressed on my chest like a hand not ready to let go. Back in DC, I was staying in a quiet guest apartment lent to me by an old contact. The city outside my window pulsed with cold light, government buildings lit like chess pieces. Safe. Controlled. Watched. My encrypted phone lit up. Rachel Lee, it's still going, she said, her voice low and clipped. The money. The influence. That offshore account's been active since Iron Veil. Whoever Falcon Red is, they're not finished. The line went quiet for a second. I'm sending everything I've got, Evelyn, it's bigger than we thought. The next morning, I walked through the front doors of the Interagency Security Council office with a clearance badge I hadn't used in nearly a decade. It still worked, the same white walls. Same slow elevators. Same wary stares from kids in their 20s who hadn't seen real sand, real blood, or real betrayal. Inside a briefing room, I laid out the files Rachel had sent, and it was worse than either of us feared. Falcon Red wasn't just some aide gone rogue. He wasn't working alone, he was a conduit, part of a strategic influence network embedded deep in a conservative policy group. They specialized in disinformation campaigns, military data manipulation, and underground lobbying efforts to shift defense doctrine from the inside. And funding them, a private defense consulting firm, the same one that had once sponsored Derek Tate's clearance. They hadn't lost Nightwolf's data, they'd kept it, used it, sold it, as leverage. As blackmail. As capital in a world that treats secrets like currency. I called Jess Parker, now stationed at Cyber Command with the rank of lieutenant colonel. We met at a small diner just outside Arlington, the kind with booths that smelled like syrup and exhaustion. I laid it out. She read through the files without a word. When she finished, she leaned back and said, "If you can prove the link to Harrow, I'll testify. But we'll need more than logs and bank trails. We need something they can't dismiss as hearsay." There was only one person who might have had it, Rachel Morgan. She'd been transferred to a nonprofit veterans legal clinic after the hearing. Rebuilding her life quietly. Brick by brick, she didn't hesitate when I called. We met in her office, wedged between a bakery and a post office. It smelled like cinnamon and coffee and a little like hope. She poured 2 chipped mugs of coffee and sat across from me. "She called me," Rachel said. Harrow. The night after the hearing, offered me a seat on the Military Justice Reform Committee. She looked down at her mug. "All I had to do was walk away from you." I held her eyes. "Did you record it?" She nodded. "I'd been recording all calls during the investigation. I didn't even think about it, I just never deleted it. I didn't know if I'd ever have the guts to use it." She reached into her drawer, pulled up the file, and played it. "If you continue to back Evelyn Dawson," Harrow's voice echoed from the speaker, "you won't work in this city again. Neither will your husband. Be smart, Rachel. Stay quiet." She paused the recording. Her hands were shaking. "I'm done being scared," she said, "not just for you, for every woman who's been told that silence is a career move." Together with Jess, we gathered everything: emails, voice files, payment trails, lobbying disclosures. We handed it to the Inspector General's office. No cameras. No press releases. Just a quiet handoff with weight behind it. Less than 48 hours later, Senator Harrow was placed under federal investigation. Her staff, her donors, her files, all frozen. Her name? Suspended pending inquiry. The Whisper network collapsed. Nightwolf was no longer a ghost story. That weekend, I stood on the steps of the Pentagon. The stone beneath my boots was warm. The wind was sharp but clean, and for the first time in years, I wasn't holding my breath for justice, because I wasn't alone anymore. Time passed, the frost thawed. Spring came slow. I visited Rachel Lee at her farm in Montana, a stretch of quiet land between 2 tired hills. The snow barely touched the fence lines. The air smelled like cedar and soil. We sat on the porch, flannel jackets wrapped tight, old coffee steaming between us. A child's laughter rang from the kitchen, her niece visiting for the week. She handed me a folded magazine, dog-eared and worn, a special edition on modern warfare, The Invisible Frontlines. No names. No faces, but on one page, a quote in bold: "Some operations were so cleanly buried, their operators became myths, but without them, modern doctrine would not exist." Rachel chuckled. "Still ghosts," she said, "but now we're the kind that cast long shadows." I nodded. "That's all we ever wanted, to be remembered. Not for glory, just for being real." Back in Greenville, I found my father hammering a new frame onto the living room wall. It was the photo from Veterans Day, me behind the podium, uniform crisp, face steady. He hung it beside my old West Point graduation picture. Beneath it, a small plaque: "Major General Evelyn Dawson, the warrior without a name." Mason and Rachel were married quietly in a chapel outside town. No drama. No speeches. Just light. And peace. At the reception, Rachel found me by the fence line. She took my hand. "If I ever have a daughter," she said, "I want her to know who you are." I didn't answer. Some truths don't need applause, just acknowledgement. That night, in the quiet of my room, I pulled out the wooden box I once kept hidden in a cot beneath a basement. Inside, the photo of me and my father at West Point, a young girl who believed in honor before it became complicated. I flipped it over and wrote a single line on the back. Then I wrapped the silver Nightwolf bracelet beside it, tucked them both into a linen cloth, and placed it in a plain envelope. It was addressed to a young lieutenant in a mentorship program I now sponsored. Inside the letter, I wrote, "When they call you a shadow, smile. Shadows only exist because there's light, and if you're a wolf, you don't need applause to know you're strong." Outside, the snowfall had returned, soft, steady, quiet, but inside, I burned bright, because sometimes what breaks us isn't the war, it's what happens after, when no one's watching. But here's the truth: strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it stands, sometimes, it survives. And sometimes, it walks straight back into the fire, and refuses to disappear. If this story moved you, let us know in the comments. If you've ever felt unseen, unheard, or erased, your story still matters. Don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe to stay connected. Thank you for being here.